Welcome back to the Bourbon Lens with your hosts, Jake and Scott. In this week's episode, we feature McCarthy's, the oldest American single malt, and their little project that they have with another brand that talks about Kentucky bourbon. And we discuss everything that's happening in the Pacific Northwest and Hood River Distillers. Who's that? We'll unpack it a little bit. And we have a really cool illustration with the planets. So don't worry. We have Caitlin Bartlemay joining us. She is brand new to being the Master Distiller there at Hood River Distillers and all things there. Again, we'll explain. So sit back and buckle in and listen to our newest episode featuring McCarthy's and a bunch of other brands along the way. Caitlin, did I do you just in the intro there?
No, you did great. Absolutely. I've been a Master Distiller now for a month, so I am still all sparkly and shiny and new.
Okay, so you got a lot going on there in Oregon, but we have to ask. I'm not out there often, nor is Scott. What's the end of May, June? What's the weather like? What's happening? What's the hustle and bustle in Oregon right now? Because in Kentucky, it's swamp ass season already. It's already starting to be really hot and humid, and nobody likes it.
So spring is one of my favorite seasons here in the Pacific Northwest, and one of the reasons I like it is finally the long dirge that is the winter time is over. And winter is definitely my least favorite. But more importantly, spring tends to be a bit of a grab bag of weather here in the Pacific Northwest. And so you honestly don't know what you're going to have every 15 or 20 minutes. So today it's every once in a while you get this big hit of petrichor flowing in the distillery and you're like, wow, did it finally start raining? It felt like it was going to mess around and do that earlier. And then you go outside and there's maybe only 5 raindrops that fall. And then all of a sudden it's bright and sunny with these big poofy clouds. And then you might wait another 15 minutes and there'll be a little hailstorm that'll kind of wander through and a big gust of wind. And then it'll go back to being beautiful. It's just, you don't know what you're going to get. And the changing of the seasons and that just kind of constant bingo wheel of what the weather's going to be. I don't know. I find it a lot of fun.
Well, it sounds like a lot like Kentucky, Scott. We get 4 seasons in a day often.
Yeah. Never ceases to amaze me.
We definitely don't have your humidity though. So I wouldn't say we don't, there's maybe only 3 days a year that we have what you would call swamp ass season. We definitely are blessed with when it is hot, it is that dry heat.
Oh.
So it's manageable.
Must be nice. Yeah. It's we're already getting days with 78% humidity.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah. So that just primes you for the 100% humidity when you you go to you worked out and you sweat and then you shower and then you come out of the shower and then you start sweating again. That is the perpetual cycle that we are about to enter here. And our barrels do that here too. They just sweat constantly during the summer, and then all the good angels share, they get all their flavor and fun. And then, we're left with half empty barrels after a few years. Which, we'll talk about all the distillation process. So, Caitlin, for those who don't know anything about you in particular, you have a really cool title, Master Distiller. That's cool. That's great. But how did you get to where you are?
14 years of a lot of work and dedication. That's kind of how you get there. At least that's how I got here. I was very fortunate in that I was hired straight out of college by Steve McCarthy. As he put it, I didn't give him an option to not hire me, which makes a great story. I'd like to think that I wasn't that overbearing, but I did call every week or 2 weeks throughout my last term at Oregon State to just be like, hey, is there anything? Do you have any questions for me? Do you still have my resume? And and they never told me to stop calling. And they eventually asked me up to Portland for an interview and then hired me. So certainly very fortunate. A lot of us that graduated in 2010 to have gotten a job straight out of college and also in my field. That didn't happen to a lot of people during that time. So certainly a total blessing to have ended up at Clear Creek. And 14 years later, I've been through, I've worn pretty much all of the hats that you can possibly wear at a distillery. When Steve hired us, none of us really had any job descriptions or job titles. That was something that came when Hood River Distillers purchased the distillery in 2014. So I was just kind of minion, one of 5 minions. We did have a lead minion, but that was about it. I think my first title was logistics coordinator, but I didn't get that until I was there for just over a year, maybe 18 months, because it's a small company. And so you wear a lot of hats. And one of my side hustles on top of distilling and packaging and cleaning and whatever else was doing all the domestic case goods shipping and a little bit of the international case goods shipping. So I did that for a number of years and then moved into the barrel room and then was distiller barrel room coordinator. And then I was head distiller and now master distiller. So growing up a farm kid, I still, the little voice in my head says, what are you doing? You're just a farm kid from Eastern Oregon. But yeah, 14 years of experience. It shows up in a lot of really interesting ways. I'm still kind of, some things that experience, I'm used to the answers that it's going to give me, but sometimes, you'll read the wind, you'll see something coming and you can warn the people that you're training, be like, oh, by the way, that's probably going to happen. And then it does. And they're like, how did you know that? And it's like, I don't know, man. It's like this weird psychic power that you get with experience. Like it's a PDF download I never expected to have on board, but I do.
Yeah. When you start out at a company and you look around and you're like, who's going to do this? And then you're like, nobody's around. I guess I'm up.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of that, right, you learned from a legend, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Steve,
from many legends.
Yeah. Well, and Steve, right, like pioneering American Single Malt, being the first American Single Malt in the country, right? Like that's really kind of one of the things that they talk about. Tragically passes away last year. What's it like to not have your mentor there now? And what's that like his legacy around you all feel that you're kind of carrying through after he, has left this world?
That is a really great question, by the way. We still, feel him knocking around. And really that just kind of goes to just kind of the rich oral history of the brand and the people that have worked within it all these years, right? Growing up a farmer, that storytelling component of how I was raised apparently is quite the gift because that comes into play in so many different places in my job, and both as training new distillers, but also getting the opportunity to talk to the both of you, right? That ability to spin a yarn, and Steve and Clear Creek and the story of the creation of McCarthy's. It is this beautiful patchwork quilt of all of these moments tied together through the brand, through the liquid in the bottle. And so every day when, we have a new distiller, Everett Rubin alongside Garrett Trotter. And so stories that Garrett has already heard me tell a couple dozen times, probably over the last 3 years, I'm getting to retell and kind of let Everett have a part and a piece of the story that's made these brands so special for the lives of so many people, and really to the category itself. And so it's a huge honor to continue to bring Steve up and lead through his example, right? He was an exceptional businessman. In fact, there's several things, if you become notorious for better or for worse about something at the distillery, that story gets added into that fabric, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the ways that Steve comes up on an almost daily basis, we call it Steving it. So in the early days, whenever he was working on barrel blends, once he had employees that he was directing, to do this work for him, he would ask whoever was running the barrel room to get him a sample, like, get me these samples of these barrels, right? And the barrel book was just like sheaves of graphing paper loosely held in a 3-ring binder, right? Like barrel book is a little bit of a stretch for what this was.
Barrel binder, right?
Yeah, it was. And like in the binder would be the piece of paper that he wrote down, like, bring me the barrel samples for these numbers, right? And then gave it to the human that was in charge of it at the time. And so all of these glasses would appear in his office, and he would smell them and he would taste them, and then inevitably he would take one of the glasses, or he would get rid of a glass so he had an empty one, and he would sit there and he would pour some out of this barrel and he'd pour some out of this one. And then he would smell and taste the glass, and then he'd hand it to the barrel, whoever was in charge of the barrel room, and say, make this. And then that was blending it. But so there was no science, there was no measurements, there was no note taking. So it wasn't even like he had the numbers of the barrels next to him and was making some even casual notes on what he was blending. So whoever was there had to make those notes and pay attention to what barrels he was pulling from and in what proportions roughly he was pulling from, and try to recreate the Steve blend in the glass. And so to this day, whenever we're working on blends, either the first thing we do or the last thing we do is a Steve blend or a Steving it. When the company wants to do experiments with a new blend or with a new product, you have to feel out the space. You have to feel out how those ingredients are going to work together. And you could bog yourself down in measurements and spreadsheets and everything like that. Or if you're just, messing around trying to feel out the space, just pour a little bit of this and a little bit of that in a few glasses and taste around and get an idea for how it's going to react in the glass. Those are all Steve blends. And so it's through small choices like that. And then also, the larger, broader strokes of the things that were really important to Steve. That's how we honor him with his legacy, and we continue to share his story with the world.
Yeah. No, that's pretty awesome. And, if you go read, Whiskey Advocate did a really nice piece on him at his passing, and it talks clearly kind of the history of McCarthy's, right? Because there's a couple distilleries that would pop up right around the same time in the mid 80s, right? Anchor, St. George's. And so he had this foresight to kind of do something and pioneer something that a lot of people didn't really know. Bourbon wasn't a thing really in the 80s. It hadn't made its comeback yet. And so I
will remind you casually that in 1984, there was only 50 breweries in the country. And that includes breweries. That includes all the AB facilities, all the big Coors. It's not just 50 microbreweries. There was 50 breweries.
Wow.
And so to talk about what distilling was in the 80s,
there wasn't many.
There was nobody.
Yeah. Count them probably on two hands. That's wild to think about, really, in all honesty. So we have this really unique brand, right? That's in the Pacific Northwest. And to me, right, we talk about McCarthy's and prestige and kind of this mystique. Tell us a little bit about what makes McCarthy's unique, because it is a very unique play that also has a parallel to a latitudinal congruent in Scotland and Islay.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So the reason we have McCarthy's in the first place, like I said in our little preamble, is because Steve wanted to and we could. That was really, there's no really cool mystical story about how, he stood on the loading dock, hands at hips, and kind of smelled the breeze and was like, I'm going to make American Single Malt a thing, right? He was on a trip to Ireland and with his wife, him and his wife, Lucinda Parker, were avid hikers, and any chance they had an opportunity to go on an adventure, they would do it. And so they were in Ireland, they were supposed to be hiking. And while it does rain in Ireland, and I'm sure they were reasonably prepared for that, turns out it was exceptionally rainy. And they were rained out. And so instead of going on their hike, they ended up availing themselves to the vast single malt collection in the cabin of the friend that they were staying in. And that's where he fell in love with the category of single malt whiskeys. And so on his trip and on his way home, he was like, all right, well, I have this distillery in Portland, Oregon. And certainly there's a lot of barley that grows in Oregon. And I know there's got to be peat bogs in Oregon. I don't see any reason why I can't make this whiskey that I love at home, right? And that was essentially the impetus behind starting Clear Creek in 1985. He had fallen in love with pear brandy when he was traveling abroad, and he was having a hard time importing it. And he was like, all right, well, why don't I just make it? Why don't I just learn how to distill and make it myself? That solves all the problems. So that was essentially the same approach to McCarthy's. And at the time when he came back, like I said, there was only in 1984, only 50 breweries across the country. But by the mid 90s, craft brewing had really taken off. And that was where the story of McCarthy's really starts, is in the mid 90s. It was first distilled in 1994, first released in 1998. But while Steve was working on the R&D for this project, he approached several small malt houses in the Pacific Northwest that had cropped up alongside the craft brewing boom, and Portland certainly being one of the epicenters of that movement. And he was like, all right, I got this really cracking idea. We're going to get this barley and we're going to get this Oregon peat, and then you're going to peat smoke the green malt, and it's going to be super awesome. And we're going to make this Oregon single malt. And unfortunately for him, the answer from all those malt houses was no, because as soon as they introduced that peat reek into their system, every craft brew that came out of the Portland area and used all those malt houses would be a smoky beer. And they didn't want to do that, right? Totally fair. We totally get it. And so the only option to really see through the style of whiskey that he wanted to make at the distillery was to import that peat malted barley from Scotland. So step one, one thing that makes us unique, it's imported peat malted barley from Scotland, and it continues to be 100% peat malted barley that we import to this day. The next thing that makes McCarthy's really interesting is that it's not twice distilled on a pot still like most of your single malts at that time were. Granted, there's a lot of different distilling techniques for American single malt now, which is one of the reasons why the category that, we hope any day the TTB will hopefully ratify and follow the commission's guidelines on the rules for American single malt. So conversely to what they currently do, or what the tradition of double pot distilling for a single malt is, Clear Creek has hybrid pot stills made from Germany. They're fruit brandy stills, right? And we're only distilling McCarthy's a single time. Now, the interesting thing about that is because they're small brandy stills and they're made from 100% copper, and they're fairly well seasoned after all these years, and even at the time with all these acidic fruit brandies they've been making, there's a lot of pitting and rivulets that get cut into the copper. So it's an incredible amount of copper contact that the vapor from the spirit comes into contact with throughout the distillation period. So even though we're only distilling it on a single pass and through like a really small hybrid still with it's a 5-window column on top of it, the amount of copper contact means that the sulfur compounds that usually make a heavily peated single malt a little bit difficult for newcomers to the category to get around, because it's overwhelming notes of like burning tires or diesel engine. A lot of that is reacted out in McCarthy's. And so what you actually have access to is like the beautiful earthy notes of the peat itself, outside of those overly meaty and fusel kind of sulfur compounds that are usually a little off-putting for new entrants into a heavily peated single malt. The last really interesting thing about McCarthy's is that it is aged 100% in Oregon oak casks. We were the first people to use Oregon oak as a spirit cask. There was a handful of people that were experimenting with Oregon oak as a wine aging cask here in Oregon at that time. We've been working with Oregon Barrel Works in McMinnville, Oregon since the beginning. Rick DeFerrari is a really amazing man. He taught my predecessor, Joseph O'Sullivan, everything he knew about making barrels. And Joseph has taught me and the team here at Clear Creek everything that you need to know about fixing and maintaining barrels. So it's been a real pleasure to work with somebody that's not hiding that information. And so we repair and restore all of our barrels in-house, which is kind of a cool piece to the training that you get as a new distiller here at Clear Creek. And it means we all have like stupid strong forearms. But yeah, and McCarthy's was originally released in 1998, right? 94. Yeah, 98. First launched in 1988 as a 3-year American single malt. And it stayed as only a 3-year until I believe 2021 was the first time that we were able to outpace sales with production enough to actually hold some back to release an older age statement. So what you have with you is the 6-year McCarthy's 100% peat malted barley imported from Scotland, aged 100% in Oregon oak for 6 years.
Wow. I mean, it's a really cool story. Like it shows the growth and trajectory of American whiskey that you all were able to kind of ride the wave, so to speak, and get more people in touch with your all's whiskey. And so speaking of, right, Scott and I are not peated whiskey drinkers. That is not our thing. So
newsflash.
But it doesn't mean.
If you don't mind my interrupting, I do have a question.
Yeah.
Is it something that you've avoided, or is it something that you've maybe like heard rumors about it and then decided it's probably not for you? Because I have a little bit of a soapbox that I get on about like dads in the 80s that I swear all shared one terrible bottle of scotch. And then we all grew up with this like saying from all of our dads. It's like, oh, don't drink scotch. It just tastes like a wet ashtray. Because it's like, I've heard it everywhere. And so I'm just curious.
I can tell you what turned it off for me, but I'll go, Scott, you go. Mine's more of a story.
Honestly, I'm a Kentucky guy. Like, there's just so much Kentucky bourbon and whiskey. It was just a category I never explored really until we started this podcast, and then about 2 or 3 years into it, we started to dabble into American Single Malt. I mean, we are the Bourbon Lens, so it's like we kind of wrestled with it. Like, how far do we go into American Single Malt?
100%.
It's I mean, it's been revealed. Like, love American Single Malt.
I've been yelled at by the Bourbon van because they run a YouTube channel, and they got introduced to American Single Malt through us and McCarthy's. And now they keep on posting videos about American Single Malt distilleries that they visit in their travel van. And they're like, we're literally called the Bourbon van. And now we're visiting American Single Malt distilleries. What have you done to us?
Yeah.
So like, I understand.
Yeah. We probably have 50 to 60 episodes on American Single Malt at this point, which is far and away the most we've explored. So I have two terrible stories when it comes to this. One, the first time I was introduced to Scotch, went into my buddy, big whiskey guy. He's like, "Oh, I'm gonna try you some Scotch." After a night of drinking, I was like, "Whatever, like let's roll." And he pours a peat monster, and I was like, "Nah, like I don't want to drink swamp ass right now," because that's what I felt like I was drinking. But I'd also had a lot of beer at that point, back before I was really a whiskey guy. So the second time we all go out, Scott's with us. He knows this story very well. We're out with a group of folks, and somebody, as a joke, does Chicago handshakes, and then which is a old style and a shot of Malort. So it was already pretty bad. And
we were on a downward spiral.
Yeah, we were on a downward spiral. And so these guys who seemingly knew a lot about whiskey and had a lot of money that were with us were like, "Hey, we're ordering a round." Well, whatever. There's the round. Like, I'm getting close to calling it a night. Scott's getting close to calling it a night. They ordered Ardbeg 16 shots.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And
probably smelled them before they even got to the counter.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was like, nah. They're like, "You got to drink it." So I drank it like a shot versus sipping it. Shooting Isla Scotch is not the move, like at all.
No.
So that really kind of deterred me. Now, I'm a big High West guy. I have liked Campfire. There's variations of that I've liked. I have tried turfed Irish whiskey from Schlieblig. That was really nice and enjoyable. So there's been stuff that I've enjoyed. Don't get me wrong. Or the mesquite movement out of Texas, or not Texas, out of New Mexico and Arizona. So there's stuff that I've liked. Or the peated American Single Malt from Boulder. Right? I'm not open to it, but 2 bad experiences with it have kind of
totally fair.
Yeah,
totally fair.
So to ask you a question. How would one who is not used to this approach tasting it? Because, like, obviously, you nose it. You taste with what you nose and all of these things. But as someone who distills this and someone who works with the actual grain and has probably conducted her fair share of tastings, how would you one approach this to say, let me get you ready to drink this? So just kind of walk us through that, because that sounds like a weird question because we drink whiskey all the time.
No, but I get it. And you are correct. I have been teaching adults how to drink alcohol for 20 years. My parents started a winery when I was in middle school, and because of the server laws, as an underage, I wasn't allowed to work at the tasting room next to the house because it was technically behind a bar. But I was able to do in-store wine tastings. So they could load me up with a pickup full of wine, send me into Portland to like a Fred Meyer's as a teenager to educate drinking adults on, what a Chenin Blanc is, what the difference between something that's been barrel aged or has been finished in stainless. So like, yes, I absolutely know what you're talking about. And I 100% have fielded a question very similar to this multiple times in a single evening at a single event. So when I'm trying to convince somebody to taste McCarthy's, I absolutely don't hide the fact that it's peated, because that is the worst thing that you could possibly do, is to just be like, oh yeah, I know it's just a really good American single malt and it's going to be fine. You're going to love it. Like, that's so mean. So I do tell them 100%, I'm upfront. It is made from 100% peat malted barley that we import from Scotland. And then when if they recoil, and they say, "Oh, I don't do PD smoky things." I will agree, and I understand that that's a choice to make. And usually, I try to convince them to give McCarthy's a try, anyways. I will go in and talk about the way that we distill it, like I did earlier. The fact that it's made on, German pot still, on a brandy still. It's a single pass distillation, so it is a really big and bold whiskey because of that single pass distillation. But it's also really mellowed and complemented by the Oregon oak, which is also a really big and bold oak decision, right? But the biggest thing that I use to talk about is the fact that while this is definitely a big peaty whiskey, it's not, in my opinion, it's not super barnyardy. It's not super medicinal. It's not even super heavy on the iodine. What I use to describe it, depending on the perceived amount of nerddom and the person that I'm talking to. So if I think that they're probably a nerd, or at least haven't lived under a rock in the last 20 years. It's a little bit like having a drink of whiskey in Fangorn Forest, right? I pull in a Lord of the Rings reference because if you can't be funny, what are you doing? But it's really is the peat that you get from the McCarthy's. It's not barnyard. It's old growth forest. So you get a lot of that forest loam, but there's also kind of a little bit of that pine note, and the smoke component. It's not in your face as much as it's a campfire that your friends are sitting at in that old growth forest. You're camping, and it's, towards twilight that, you're getting close to the dew point, and that kind of wet campfire smoke is finding its way to your nose and telling you you're getting pretty close to the campsite, right? You maybe you're just out of earshot of your friends. Maybe you can hear it when somebody laughs, but you're able to kind of smell everything that's growing and living around you. And that is what McCarthy's has to offer with its peat expression within that barley. Yeah. And usually at that point in time, I've convinced them to at least give it a try. And I would say the conversion rate is better than you would think. And I think that is because we are reacting out so many of those sulfur components. And so it is really bold and it's really big, but that Oregon oak really complements the peat characteristics that come through, and even the smoke as well. And so it's a really big, round, whole mouth experience of a whiskey. But I would say that my conversion rate on that is probably around 65, 70%. So wow. 30% of the people that come up to me and say, I absolutely will not like a peated whiskey, still don't like a peated whiskey when they leave. But I think it's worth giving those 70% a chance to try something new, and maybe have something that makes it a little bit easier to understand why peat and what there is that's appealing in that process. Yeah,
no, I think that makes sense. I've I've tasted both of the single malts that we have, the PX sherry finished, and then just the traditional single malt. What I will say is the traditional one is that more campfire. Like as you kind of explained that it all kind of made sense. The PX now, going to your food science background, this gets you into the barbecue realm, right? More pit barbecue, maple syrup, like brown sugar type notes, which is really nice. Scott, you're kind of nodding along. Is that kind of what you're thinking too, from a variance perspective?
Yeah. I mean, like the peatiness is not overwhelming in this. It's definitely there, but it is kind of like what you said. You're near the campfire, but you're not right on top of it.
Yep.
So, for me, like a couple of my like nosing notes, which definitely like my perception led to the palate, but it was like It was big time vanilla, but then also it was like perfumey, like piney notes as well.
Mhm.
Like that you said pine, like you're walking through a forest, but
Mhm.
like the pine definitely stood out to me. So it's almost like herbally. I don't know. It's kind of hard to describe.
I always just kind of imagine like if you went into like an old growth evergreen forest, right? And you just dug your hands into the like eons of pine needles that have kind of stacked up and dried around the bases of it. Like that's the peak characteristic of McCarthy's. Like you get some of that fresh green piney characteristic that's still kind of left in those broken needles. And then you also get them kind of like that rich soil, like kind of the faint kind of maybe hint of rains long past, that little bit of petrichor, right? Yeah, it's got it's a smell of a place, right? It smells like the best campsite you've ever been in.
I think that's a great way to like waking up after the campfire has died down.
Oh yeah, first thing in the morning, the sun is just barely peeked through the trees.
Got some dew going on.
A walk in the woods. There we go.
Yeah.
Yep.
But what's really nice is once you get past that, right? Because your palate acclimates. There's a nice apple, like fruit notes that start to shine, vanilla, caramel, like those are really nice. But there's a really kind of like a nice crisp apple that I got, from nose to palate to finish. That would be like a smoked apple pie. Like that's kind of what I was gonna like a la mode. That's kind of what I was getting, because that malt has a lot of breadiness to it. That gives it a touch of sweetness, but a touch of like character and body. I've come to appreciate it, right? Like it's different than, 2 years ago when I'd been like, yeah, no, thanks. Now I'm like, I appreciate this because it's a style of whiskey that a lot of people like. It's a style of whiskey that I should be able to understand and appreciate. And I understand and appreciate this now. So I appreciate you kind of walking through that from that standpoint. What is the proof on these, Scott? Those were not on the samples.
I ran out of room on the sample bottles. Proof on the 6-year is 100 proof.
Okay.
And then the PX is 112.2.
I was going to say, I thought the PX was a little more proofy, but not in a bad way. Just it had like, you got more barrel spice, right? Like you could tell it was just more unleaded for lack of better terms. Right. Yeah. But both are very, very nice. The PX probably is more my palate. I tend to like that PX roundedness, that fig, that jam.
Oh yeah. Like who doesn't love a Pedro Jimenez sherry cask finish of just about anything? Like that is, like, I love all kinds of sherry, but like it's the Cadillac of sherry. Like, come on.
Yeah. It was
good. Is it new oak? Is it new oak in the, I guess, the original single malt?
Oh, for the Oregon? Yeah. It's a mix of new and used cooperage for all of it.
Nice.
We don't blend to like specific standardized percentages. So every time we pull a blend, it's the best McCarthy's that we can make out of the barrels that are of age, right? So, I mean, if you wanted to give me a couple days of work, I could go back through all the different blends and actually give you the percentage of new versus used cooperage. It is a mix of both for sure. And like we sell the odd single barrel as well. And, we're going through and tasting through barrels and selecting things for single barrels. When you're selecting for single barrels, you're looking for something that definitely tastes like McCarthy's. It definitely feels like it fits in with the brand and what you expect of the flavors of that brand. But you're also looking for something that's just really special, right? And special means a lot of different things. It doesn't have to special, and you have to be able to make choices not just based on what your preference and your palate is. You have to be able to make some choices like what somebody else might find really, really positive, but you might not. Like I know that I'm fairly sensitive to bitter. But I know that Garrett loves things that are bitter. And so if we find something that is too bitter for me, but that Garrett really loves, we know that we're maybe alienating a a portion of the population. So if we can find something that I can handle, but he's still happy with, then we know that we've hit that level, right? And so that might be something that we might consider really beneficial in a single cask is like, yeah, this has this really interesting but good bitter note. And so when you're exploring all those, you kind of get to see the nuances of it. But we're just, at the end of the day, we're trying to make the best McCarthy's blend for each blend release that we have. So sometimes it's new, sometimes it's old. All those single barrels, they come from, some of them have been from third fill casks. Some of them have been first fill casks.
Yeah.
Some of them have been from casks. I mean, because we started out very experimental with hardly any or no information available from those that have gone before. We have 4 different barrel sizes for McCarthy's because, we were working with Oregon Barrel Works, and Rick's like, hey, do you want to try some 400 liter casks? And Steve was like, I can fit more whiskey in there. So we have a series of 400 liter casks. We haven't bought any more after those ones, but we do have them. And the first few whiskeys that they brought to age, we didn't particularly feel they suited a single barrel. But over the last 2 years, a great portion of the single barrels that we've had available have come out of those 400 liters. So the casks, mature and change over the years just as much as the whiskey does. And so there's definitely a lot to be said about used cooperage. And I think, and also when you're talking about the different aging climates that we have, that's one of the reasons why it was really important to the American Single Malt Commission to include new and used cooperage, because one, they're not trying to make it so expensive that new entrants can't get into the field and maintain a presence in American Single Malt. But two, because of the different aging climates, used cooperage might be the only way to be able to get that balance between the oak characteristic and the whiskey that you're making, depending on where you're aging it. And so we don't, as the commission didn't want to hem in anybody's creativity or limit them because of where they're making whiskey. And so that's the really important perspective to look at what the commission has sent to the TTB through, right? It's trying to make sure that it's as inclusive to all producers as possible while still maintaining, an identity of its own.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the Oregon Single Malt has a nice, barrel characteristic to it. And that's one thing I think some bourbon drinkers might struggle with. They like that new charred oak. They like that caramel vanilla, that you get. They don't like the second fill or, the used cooperage as much, but being able to play with both of those and bring in those wood elements that people seek out in American whiskeys. I think that's a lot of fun
and these are also all medium toast. There is no char in anything that Clear Creek makes. We buy medium toast barrels, period, full stop.
Wow. That's pretty cool. And very unique. So speaking of that, right, with new used cooperage kind of combo, have you all ever thought about Celeritizing your whiskey? So you could have
in a world where where we had space and time, you betcha. Of course we have. We're spirits nerds. The company, every once in a while, the company will come up to the distillery, or they'll send me an email and they'll be like, hey, nerds. So we know that you're not supposed to be working on new experimental products because we've told you not to, but we also know that you're incorrigible nerds. So we're going to come up and try whatever you can throw at us in 2 weeks. And then we're like, oh, really? You're going to come taste it all? And so, there is a little bit of an expectation that we're always kind of poking around and quietly, running some small scale experiments for hopefully some future rollouts. And that's kind of how one of the reasons that we ended up landing on the 6-year release is we had a barrel of McCarthy's that we sent forward through time as our Voyager probe into what older releases of McCarthy's could be like. And so when that barrel turned 6, we pulled samples and we were like, it's pretty darn good at 6. We should probably release a 6-year McCarthy's. And so in 2021, we were able to do that.
That's cool. So I teased this in the intro, and we're going to leave McCarthy's because we got to come back to the bourbon element of things here. You talked about the solar system, right? So Hood River Distillers makes up this solar system. They've been making distillated products for 90 years. Woohoo! Happy birthday. And that's the sun. At that, you went Neil deGrasse Tyson on me and I lost you. So explain to people how Clear Creek and all the other partners kind of fit in this ethos of the Hood River Distillers solar system.
Absolutely. I'm happy to. It's the only way to make things make sense because boy, do we have a lot of products. I think Hood River Distillers has over 30 brands and over 300 SKUs spread out between those 30 brands. So it's a whole lot to kind of wrap your head around. So we'll go to the solar system. So like you said, absolutely. Hood River Distillers is the sun. They're the mothership that we all revolve around. And within that paradigm, Clear Creek is Saturn. The reason it's Saturn is because Saturn is the coolest planet, and this is my story, so I get to pick which one we are. So we're Saturn. Saturn is going to be the actual planet itself. Those are all the fruit brandies, fruit liqueurs, grappas. That's everything that Clear Creek makes that is actually Clear Creek branded, comes in our packaging. The rings then are going to be McCarthy's. As we go forth with Hood River Distillers, now that we're not an independent distillery and we're part of this larger brand house, McCarthy's doesn't really fit in with a bunch of European fruit brandies when you talk about fitting it into a portfolio. But the story of McCarthy's and the story of Clear Creek are really important to each other. And so we don't want it to drift too far away in being its own independent brand. So McCarthy's really is the rings of Saturn, right? We tell the story of Clear Creek along with McCarthy's. We talk about McCarthy's when we talk about Clear Creek Distillery. They are very important to each other, but definitely not necessarily need to be in the same portfolio every day, all day, whenever we're talking to people about either one. Now it comes to all of these other independent brands. Not only is Clear Creek Distillery in charge of all of our brandies and McCarthy's American Single Malt, we're also a production facility for a number of different independent brands for the company. And so I've described all those independent brands as the moons that orbit Saturn, because Saturn has a whole bunch of moons. And so while Clear Creek is only, I think it's 19 liquids we're sitting at right now with Clear Creek, and McCarthy's, if you include the single barrels, is up to 7. We are actually, actively managing nearly 30 liquids that come out of this facility. So those include 3 different vodkas, or 2 that are independent brands, Timberline and Lewis and Clark Premium Vodka. We've got Old Delicious, which is double bourbon barreled apple brandy. We are making the De Graaf Amaro and Aperitivo, and then also the Trails End Bourbon line. All of these things are made by Clear Creek. It's called out sometimes on the packaging, definitely on the sell sheets and on the website that Clear Creek is making them. But they're well outside the creative sandbox that is anything Clear Creek branded. And then you move out further throughout the solar system. Big Gin, our sister distillery up in Seattle. Alex Myers runs that show. That's Neptune because it's the second dopest planet. And I love my boy Alex. So he's out there being Neptune with all of the London Dry gin that he makes, as well as the barrel-aged expressions of Big Gin. And then all of the other brands like our Batanga tequila that we make with the Orandine family down out of Jalisco in Mexico, and everything else that Hood River makes. They're all these little brand houses, each one contained within its own creative sandbox about what that product is, how we can create it, how we can create line extensions, what the brand identity is, but all rotating around the sun of Hood River Distillers, which means that no matter what it is, we're going to give you we're always going to deliver a better product than what the price point is asking for. That's pretty much, it's always going to be really good. We're going to work with as many local vendors and local businesses as possible. And if we're selling you a bottle of vodka for $20, the liquid inside you would spend $35 and still be happy with.
Nice. So we have orbited the sun, and there's this little thing, and we've gone down the trail. And we have Trails End, which is a Kentucky bourbon that has an Oregon flair. So can you tell us a little bit about the 8-year Trails End? And I believe you said in our pre-show, it's finished with Oregon wood staves. Did I get that right? Okay. My memory serves me well.
Great.
What makes this unique, right? You said it, and I'll paraphrase here, because you shared with us that this ages in Kentucky and then it meanders its way to the Oregon Trail. and no one died of malaria on the way there,
Correct.
or no one got bit by a snake and swelled up and died. We made it across the Mississippi.
Yep.
What a great show that
You forded the river.
And
absolutely.
It was also a really terrible game that you played on your computer in the 90s. If you don't get the reference,
you hunted some bears.
Gen Zs, you've missed out. We've made it to the Oregon Trail. So we're there, right? So now what do you all do when the whiskey gets to Clear Creek Distillers?
I would like to back up just like a half a step. So Trails End exists in the first place because Ron Dodge, who is the patriarch of the majority owning family and president of the board of directors for Hood River Distillers, in the early 2000s, I think, started, kind of reading the industry and was like, you know what, I think bourbon's going to have a moment. I think bourbon's on its way up. Things are going to be happening for that category. And at the time, Hood River Distillers was just a brand house. They were a blender. Pre-prohibition, they would have been called a rectifier. So buying bulk spirits, blending them together, creating brands, creating new packaging, all that kind of stuff, right? That was what Hood River's been doing since the late 50s until they bought Clear Creek all the way in 2014. So he was like, all right, bourbon's going to have a moment. I'm going to start buying some Kentucky bourbon. I'm just going to hide it. I'm just going to hide it in my back pocket, right? It's going to be fine. At some point in time, the right project, the right idea will come along. And then look, I have this, let's have this bourbon right here. Oh, I'll just go ahead and use that. So that is kind of the reason that we have Trails End to begin with, because a lot of people are randomly Hood River Spirits Company. Why do you have all of a sudden this really beautiful 8 and 10-year-old bourbon? That's why. And so when Clear Creek was purchased by Hood River Distillers, that was about the time that Ron dug his hands into his pockets and came to this fresh team of spirits nerds and was like, oh, by the way, I've been buying up all this bourbon for the last 8 and 10 years down in Kentucky. We didn't really know what we were going to do with it, but what do you guys think, nerds? What do you think you could do with it? And with Clear Creek Distillery being the house built of Oregon oak with McCarthy's, one of the first ideas that the team spit out was, hey, why don't we do an Oregon oak finish? And then because my brain has a hatred of being idle, I was distilling and I was like, all right, we're going to do this Oregon oak thing with the bourbon, and being absolutely a millennial that's spent so many hours playing the Oregon Trail game. I was like, all right, well, it starts in Kentucky, which isn't necessarily the beginning of the Oregon Trail, but we're going to do these Pacific Northwest finishes on this bourbon. Why don't we call it Trails End? That sounds kind of cool.
Nice.
And so I was absolutely terrified, trembling, and went up to our general manager's office at the time and knocked on his door. And I was like, Brad, I was just thinking maybe we could call it Trails End. Okay, bye. And then almost literally ran out of his office because I was so nervous. And then 6 months later, we had an all company meeting and they're like, yeah, so we went to a design firm and we asked them what we should do, what we should maybe call this product. And after 6 months, they couldn't come up with a better name than Bartlemay did. So we're going to call it Trails End.
Nice.
So it's been a really interesting experience, going all the way from Ron, seeing ahead of time that bourbon was going to have a moment, all the way to where we are now, where Trails End actually has, we have 3 mainstays to the line, and then we have kind of a rotating LTO portion of it, limited time offering finishes that we're kind of exploring with Trails End. So with the 8-year, that was the first one, and definitely, for first out of the gate for Clear Creek, Trails End, and HRD to work together on a project. It is 8-year Kentucky bourbon that is finished with toasted Oregon oak staves. So those barrels come to age in Kentucky. They're shipped here in barrels. We empty those barrels out into a tank, and then we use math in our brains, and we add a certain amount of toasted Oregon oak staves into that tank. The tank gets mixed and tasted every day. And when it tastes like Trails End, we pull it and bottle it. That's as simple as that. There is a rough, I can't, and it's been so long since I made it, I actually can't remember how many days, but it does vary. You can't put the whiskey plus the staves in there based on math and 7 days every time. It's never the same amount of days. You have to taste it every day, and you have to be able to listen to the whiskey just like you would when you're pulling a blend. You have to be able to listen to that whiskey and let it tell you when it's ready. And you can't be like, oh, it's too bad, we've got orders, we got to get it in bottles. No, when Trails End is ready, it'll tell you, and that's when we pull it off the staves and bottle it.
It's a very unique whiskey in a good way. I did not know whiskey could taste in the vein of key lime pie or pina coladas, but this does, with a fresh lumber mill kind of going on. So it's like if I were to have my key lime pie and my pina colada at Home Depot, I'd be right where I need to be. And I enjoy that, right? Home Depot might be my favorite. Like walk into them, Lowe's, any local hardware store.
Oh, I'm right there with you. Love it.
I walk in and I feel like I do the dad move. I kind of pull up my britches a little bit and like, hands on my hips. What aisle am I going to today? And then I spend way too much money.
Yeah.
But I like it. This is like summer in a glass to me. And I think this is way proofier than I even have. Again, Scott didn't tell me the proof on this one, but I'm going to say 100 and something.
The 8 is 90.
90.
The 10 is 105, and the apple brandy barrel finish is also 105. But I don't think I sent you the apple brandy barrel finish.
No,
those are the 3
jealous.
Permanent. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Next time. But no, this is a really.
You can try all of them. You can try all the experiments as well. I think I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 5 experiments in house right now.
I'm happy to drink them if you need feedback. But no, this is a really, really nice whiskey. It's very interesting. Scott, like, your traditional corn bourbon guy. What's your thought on this kind of unique whiskey?
Yeah, I mean, it's big time like butterscotch for me. Like butterscotch, melted marshmallows, like I get a little bit of the fruit, but not as much, I guess, tropical as like you do. But it's almost like, again, back in the forest, and now we're roasting s'mores. Yeah, it's like sweet but a little savory, and
yeah, I'm with you on the marshmallow.
This is like toasted barrel finished whiskey, a prototype for me. Like, this is what toasted does.
Yeah.
It's just lightly.
Yeah, there's some kind of like roasted hazelnuts, a little bit of graham cracker in there as well that kind of accompanies those really great like caramelized, like barbecued corn kind of notes as well. And when we talk about the things that we're experimenting with Trails End, we're kind of exploring the culinary heritage and history of the Pacific Northwest. So we started with the Oregon oak, but one of the other mainstays is that apple brandy barrel finish. And so, apples definitely grown in abundance here in Oregon and Washington for sure. And when we're experimenting with this bourbon, we're not trying to add flavors to this bourbon. We're not trying to hide this bourbon or obscure it in any way. What we're trying to do with these finishes is to gently nudge the flavors and aromas that are being perceived to the surface, right? So with we're not, the toasted hazelnuts, those fatty nuts, some of those graham crackery notes that we were talking about, those s'mores, that sweetness, those were things that were already in this really wonderful bourbon. But with that addition of the toasted Oregon oak staves, all of a sudden you can't get away from it. It's undeniable, right? And so it's the same thing with that apple brandy barrel finish. You were talking about some of the fruity floral notes with that apple brandy barrel finish. Wow, holy cow, you can't get away from the amount of like fresh citrus and stone and palm fruits that are already in this bourbon. They're just really, really quiet unless you have a really tuned palate and years of sensory experience and make it easy for you to have access to some of the nuanced flavors in some of these whiskeys, right? So we're just kind of doing these kind of gentle nudges to really explore what is already in this amazing bourbon.
Yeah, it's almost like you add salt at the end of the, when the meal is cooked, plated, you add like a touch of salt.
Yeah, finishing
just
salt
brings everything up.
Yeah. I know I'm not going to ask for like mash bill, but is it more high rye? Is it high?
I can give you the mash bill. I just can't give you where this bourbon comes from.
Okay, well there we go. I like that.
So it's 78, 10, 12. So 12% rye.
So high malt, which is, pretty unique for Kentucky, in particular. But no, I think it's a really, really well balanced pour. And I have to rinse my glass out, rinse, repeat here as, I can't leave and not talk about the 10-year because who doesn't want to talk about 10-year Kentucky bourbon?
Absolutely.
So what is unique about this one in particular that is different than the 8-year?
I almost kind of wanted to, I know that I'm supposed to be the one interviewed on this podcast, but I would actually love the opportunity for you to taste the 10-year and for you to tell me the perceived difference between the 8-year and the 10-year.
Scott, you have the bottle, so
and I could just lead you along. But I think they are definitely unique and different from each other. Even though one's been finished with the toasted Oregon oak staves, the other in toasted Oregon oak barrels. But I would be interested in the things that you two are finding that's different about the 10 versus the 8.
And we can always edit out the sniffs and
the silence.
Slurping.
Sure. Yeah.
That's like my favorite thing to edit out because I'm looking at the files on GarageBand. I'm like, right there. That's where we were sniffing.
Plus, this gives you guys the opportunity to show off and show everybody that you really do know what you're talking about.
Well, that's bullshit.
Is that imposter syndrome?
Yeah. I ain't got it. I ain't. Trust me. I'll do a lot of things, but I know that I can taste whiskey better than the average bear. That's about it.
Did you say, I guess going back, you said 78, 12, 10, 12 is the rye? 10.
Mm-hmm. 78, 10, 12. 12 is the rye. Yeah.
12
rye.
rye. Gotcha.
Don't ask me why I memorized it that way. I just did. And it sounds cool when you say 78, 10, 12.
Yeah. I mean, going back to the 8-year, it's like next campfire, or bonfire that we have out back. Like I'm bringing that whiskey because like you want marshmallows, you want s'mores. This is what we're going with.
Mm-hmm.
Save a few calories, I guess.
No, have them both. You only live once. And
when I was growing up,
don't count when you're on vacation, which is camping. They don't exist.
Yeah,
calories don't exist.
When I was growing up, I really did not like s'mores, but it's like now, like making my son's s'mores. I'm like, hell yeah, I'll have a bite of that. I'm not that I'm an exceedingly tidy person. Good Lord, if my mother listens to this and I try to pull off that I'm a tidy person, boy, she's going to call me up before she even finishes the podcast. However, the untidiness of a s'more is not necessarily my favorite thing as a functioning adult. But I have, and I know we're only supposed to be talking about bourbon, so feel free to edit this out. I make a pie with the McCarthys that is essentially like a smoky s'mores. It's a riff on a grasshopper pie. And so instead of using creme de menthe, I use a pretty heavy pour of single barrel McCarthys and a touch of salt. And it is phenomenal. Can you airmail that?
I know it's like a refrigerator pie. So like in the wintertime, I could probably make an attempt at mailing you some of my McCarthy's pie.
Freeze it with some dry ice.
Yeah, right.
Ship it with some dry ice.
Uh-huh. I can send you the recipe though if you want to do it, and it isn't a graham cracker crust. So
I would attempt it.
My favorite way to consume it's either that or what my friends have called Betty White bars, which are Rice Krispie treats that you make with golden grams, and then you put some chocolate chips in there. Like I haven't made Rice Krispie treats with Rice Krispies in decades. Golden grams is the play.
No, see that's like my guilty pleasure. I should make 2 batches of Rice Krispies every time I do it because one is inevitably I'm going to eat the whole damn thing.
Oh no, for sure. Yeah, no. If I make Rice Krispies with golden grams, it's the whole malto meal bag. It's like it's a double batch for sure.
Yeah. So
okay,
going back to
business.
Going back to the 10-year, I get a lot more like wood spiced. Like spiciness to it, like cinnamon. I don't know what the hell is cinnamon even really cinnamon. Like, what is the bark that they?
No, it is not. What the actual tree? It's acacia, I believe.
Yeah, like it's like when you have those.
Mm-hmm.
This is like if Andy's Mints had if dark chocolate versus regular milk chocolate. So there's that bitter dark chocolate nose on the nose, mint. I got cinnamon. I got clove. You get a little bit more of the barrel tannin. So when you drink it, it's a little more astringent, dries the palate out. Chocolate, wood, like wood not in like, it's just woody, right? Like going again to the outdoors. But then there's a little caramel that shows up in there, which is really nice, balanced by some mint. I think the mint is like the heavy note for me. I think that's what is kind of pulling through nose to palate for me. That and the chocolate both really kind of shine, but the barrel astringency is the difference. Like this is more palate zapping, where the 8-year was more palate giving, right? Like it watered your palate, where this one zaps it. This kind of reminds me of a wine finish almost. Like with that astringency, which is really nice. I love wine finish whiskeys.
Yeah, and I will remind you, it's 105 proof. It's 15 higher than the 8-year that you guys just tried.
Yeah.
And the other thing
in my mind, it doesn't drink at 105.
No, I would have not said that. I think this kind of goes with your cordials, your fortified wines. Like this is where that kind of this pour would sit for me. It would be perfect with the dessert. So you're talking about your grasshopper pie that you just mentioned, like that would go well with this because that mint and like everything would kind of come through. The finish is a little shorter, which I was surprised with the way the mouthfeel kind of played out. But overall, like they're two really unique and different pours. I think they both have a place in a night. You could go from one to the other and be pleasantly happy with both.
I definitely get that like high cacao, like dark chocolate.
There's also like kind of.
Have you seen a cacao pod? Just as an aside, real quick, they're very ugly looking.
Yeah.
Very.
No, ugly. No, they doesn't look good. And once you open one up, it's even grosser.
No, it looks like it's like you got slimed, but with white slime.
Like who's the first person that was like, I need to turn this shit into food, like coffee, like who was like, we should roast this in a fire.
Yeah.
And then put like grind it up and put hot water on it.
I mean, I will remind you, like you're not wrong. Humans have done some really crazy things, like trying to cure just about every disease with mercury, right? We saw liquid mercury and we're like, oh, I bet you that would make this sore on my leg heal up. I bet you that would cure this cancer. I bet you it would get rid of my asthma. I bet you it would keep my hair from falling out. Like the number of diseases that humans have tried to cure with liquid mercury over the centuries.
Somebody else go first.
Hilarious. So yeah, no, it doesn't surprise me at all that somebody opened up that cacao pod and was like, I'm gonna eat that. I'm gonna roast it and then grind it up, and then I'm gonna put some more water in it, and it's gonna be medicine because why wouldn't it be medicine? It tastes like medicine. It'll probably cure me of something.
Wow.
But it made really good, yummy, delicious treats.
Total aside is like, who grew something and then dried it out and then wanted to smoke it? Like
no, yeah, for sure. Oh no, that one is fairly like, the tobacco leaves or marijuana, that one's a much easier leap. Like they were just burning everything, and then they're like, boy, that stuff that we burned last night, that was a crazy night. Let's do that again. Let's remember what that plant looked like. That's easy to fall ass backwards into that one.
Yeah, or going into the forest and be like, let me pull up this mushroom. Oh, great.
Hey, Carl didn't die when he ate it. That means we can just keep eating them.
Hey, you see where that cow just took a shit over there? We need that. What's underneath that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yummy.
That's another one of my like soapbox speeches really is, when we talk about humans and alcohol, like to be human is to be into alcohol. Like we've always been into it. And there is no doubt in my mind that when we were roving bands of humans, nomads going through from region to region, kind of on a pattern through the seasons in order to survive, right? That there wasn't a place somewhere in the Caucasus Mountains where apples are from, which is not really that far from the cradle of humanity, being, in the Egypt and the Nile and everything, right? They were wandering through there in the fall, and there were some horrible, terrible, bitter apples, crab apples that had fallen on the ground and fermented, because fruit just wants to be alcohol anyways. And they ate them, and they're like, boy, this kind of tastes terrible, but like that was a cracking good night around the fire that night.
Buzzed.
You remember how awesome that was? Let's make sure we go there again next year. And then that was something that they looked forward to, is like on that one spot when they're walking through the mountains, and they're like, yeah, that's when those weird tasting apples, that's what they are. We're going to get those again. There's signs of brewing and winemaking and brandy making that go back thousands of years. Like fruit and grain want to be fermented. They want to ferment. And humans have always been like, you know what? That's great.
We're gonna try that. Have you ever
We're gonna
read
do that on purpose this time?
Yeah. Have you ever read the book is called Doctors and Distillers?
I'm gonna write it down though.
Yeah, it came out a few years ago, and Camper English is the author. He's also the same guy that wrote a book on ice. I think it's literally called the ice book. He just nerds out about ice and cocktails and everything. But Doctors and Distillers, it's an awesome book if you're nerdy about this type of stuff, because they talk about like the medicinal uses of alcohol, like through times, like whether it was cocktails or just making wine. And so,
first distiller that we know of and on record, we don't even know what her name was, but her title was Taputi, and she was an ancient Egyptian alchemist distiller, making perfumes and tinctures and essential oils through distillation, and they were 100% medicinal.
And now millennials are still making essential oils.
Hey, any historic text has wine. They've been fermenting grapes forever, right?
Yeah, any piece of fruit is just an alcohol bomb waiting to happen. Yeah. It's literally that white fuzz on the outside, that powder, that's all natural yeasts and wild bacteria and everything that just want to eat that sugar and turn it into alcohol.
Yummy. Yeah. And I enjoy all of it. And I enjoy these whiskeys, and I expect to enjoy more from the ethos of Hood River Distillers, and particularly the Planet Saturn, which is Clear Creek Distillery. And you can count on that we will use that some way, shape, or form when the podcast releases. But to do my job as the host, I will play, kind of corral here. I'll corral everyone. I will be the sheepdog as I pet my sheep.
Back to center.
I'm petting my sheepdog literally right next to me right now. So as we close up, Caitlin, first of all, thank you for joining us and hanging out with us. I know it's dinner time there.
No, it's early for me. Yeah. You guys are the ones that are late.
It's nap time for me. And I say nap because I have an infant at home. But sure. We really appreciate you joining us, and we are excited to see what the next 90 years brings. Hopefully we'll be alive for some of that, probably not till the next 90. But we really appreciate you joining us and helping us explore peated American Single Malt and everything that is McCarthy's and Hood River Distillers and all the other brands that make that up. So thanks for joining us tonight. If you would, where can people find out more about McCarthy's and the rest of the solar system?
Absolutely. So we have a few brand accounts on Instagram. So Hood River Distillers has an account. I run the accounts for McCarthy's, Trails Inn, and Clear Creek Distillery because Master Distillership comes in with a lot of different fun facets to the job. We also have a really wonderful website. All of the things that we talked about today, all the McCarthy's expressions and Trails End expressions, all of those are available online through our website, as well as through distributors and stores and restaurants across the United States. So we're not hard to find.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you joining us. And until next time, everybody, cheers.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bourbon Lens. Make sure you're connected with Scott and I via social media on Instagram, X, and Facebook. We'd love to connect. And if you're more the professional type, follow us over on LinkedIn. If you want to know more about Bourbon Lens, make sure you're subscribed to our weekly newsletter, The Weekly Pour. For exclusive content and more, check out Patreon, Follow us there at Bourbon Lens. And last but not least, on your favorite podcast listening app, make sure you're subscribed because every Monday, Scott and I release a podcast, and we would love to have you here listening to the newest features and the newest whiskey news. And until next time, cheers.